Sometimes you have to go back in history to look at the foundation of the music industry and where we are today. So fortunate to have a conversation with Lou Vaccarelli. He is a music industry executive. He worked for CBS, Columbia Records, and a number of other entities. And we learn about vinyl, cassette tapes, 8 tracks, about how the music business evolved over time and how sometimes things never change. We also talk about Christian churches and the music that's being developed there. I think you're going to find this episode very interesting. Come on, let's check it out. Hey, everybody, I'm very excited to have a music industry insider that can provide us with the foundation and the history of record production, and how everything came about and all the different changes from vinyl to cassette to 8-track. And I'm so happy to have Lou Vaccarelli on the Long Island Sound podcast. Lou, welcome to the program.
Hello, Steve. Happy to be here.
So good to have you. And it's so good. I'm excited because I remember you shared a story with me about the difference between the plastic used on a 45 pressing as opposed to a full vinyl album. And we'll get into that. And for all those young knuckleheads out there, what we're talking about when we say vinyl, we're talking about records, little holes in the middle that would go at different speeds, 33 and a third and 78s. And we'll get all into that. And Lou's background, I'll just give a little brief and we can dive into it. Lou started out in the printing business for a year. And as I recall, as you said, it was the worst year of your life. And then you went and you worked with CBS. So take us to that point. You're a young man working in New York City and you're working for CBS. Tell us about that journey in the business.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is. I hope your editing skills are good because this could be a long story. You're talking about 1970. So how many years ago is that? 50, maybe more, but whatever.
Yep.
All right. So after being in the printing business, it was January, I guess, 71 is when cigarette commercials were not allowed on television. Okay. And CBS was concerned that so they went through a whole layoff period, January. And then by, I think it was April, they already had all of the sponsors back. So they were rehiring. And I happened to see this job in the New York Times. We used to go into a want section. And I wanted out of this other job. And I was there exactly a year. In college, they told you give yourself a year. And it was still bad. I could have given myself 2 months. But I attribute the guy that made my life miserable, okay, there, to me being able to do what I did because nothing else affected me. That's how bad it was.
Wow. Okay.
And think about what the record industry was like in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. They were maniacs. It was crazy. So I applied to CBS, and I was the youngest buyer of paper and printing in New York at the time.
Okay.
But they were looking for somebody with a degree in graphic arts, advertising technology, printing management, which is what I had. I went there. And at that time, CBS owned the Yankees, and I was buying tickets for the Yankees, even though they never made it to the playoffs. We were buying playoff tickets. For whatever the reason is, nobody wanted to do the Yankees, so they would send anybody that came in with presentations for the Yankees. Guy came in with Velcro for the first time. And he said, "Oh, wouldn't it be great for the baseball players to have Velcro on their shoes? They can open and close them without." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Don't you realize they kill time tying their shoes? You not going to be able to kill time by tying their shoes." So I poo-pooed Velcro. Okay. One of my claims to fame. Yeah. So that, and I worked actually real closely with Lou Dossman, who helped design the CBSI.
Okay.
Frank Stanton, who was the president, Bill Paley, who basically owned the company, and Frank Stanton was hands-on. We were going through changing at that particular time, and changing from Columbia Broadcasting System to CBS Inc., because they also owned Columbia Records, and they also owned Hold Right On and Winston, which is a publishing company. They also owned a number of different businesses. So, and they wanted to keep the CBS name less in broadcasting to make it more generic. So it was about changing all the stationery and all the business cards and all the headers. I was buying, if you ever see in a sporting event on the side of the television, there's the CBSI, and that was, and there was always problems. And I guess what I always loved was getting out of problem situation. So one of the problems they brought to me was that the CBSI kept getting scratched off, and because it was
Okay.
silk screen, so it was thick ink. So I scratched my head. I go, well, it's clear plastic. Why don't we just print it in reverse on the other side, which is actually what a CD ends up being because it's
Okay.
okay. But and then it won't scratch, and that's what happened. The same thing with television. Television, they in those days, television, the cameras had lag. Something white went across the screen. That's why they couldn't wear checkers, they couldn't wear white, they could wear gray. So it was getting expensive for all this paper because they had forms and 5-page forms. So we started printing a black screen on the pages so that it was a
Interesting.
CBS gray, special color gray. Hamilton Bond had a CBS logo that was incorporated in it. And so everything that I went to school for started to gel and work there. Being at CBS for a year, well, actually less than a year, I started working with the Columbia Records printing plant. They were printing what they
Okay.
called in those days slicks because albums had paper attached to cardboard before it was printed on board. And they were
Okay.
printing slicks, and I was printing CBS mastheads for the corporate through Columbia Records. I figured, why not use a sister company? But then the manager of the plant knew me then, and he heard that there was an opening at CBS in the purchasing department, like Columbia Records, that is. So I applied, went, and they hired me. They wanted me. And anyway, but all the people at CBS says, don't go there. It's crazy. If you think
Right.
it's nuts, it's this, it's that, it's too pressured. I said, nothing could be as bad. Nothing could be as bad as my first job. So
Right. Right.
I'm gonna wing it. They hired me as a senior buyer of packaging materials. So I was responsible for 2 or 3 people, I guess, that reported to me that were doing new releases, catalog, just packaging. And then
Wow.
the record club. And the record club had
Yeah.
its own.
I got to stop you right there because when I was doing my research, and I remember Columbia House. And for those who don't know, Columbia House was a mail-in subscription service. And as a young teenager, it would be on the back of like Parade magazine and on the Sunday paper. And it was so enticing for a knucklehead kid who would say he was 18 to sign the subscription to get, 6, 8 records. And then it became cassettes and 8 tracks and a
CD.
very interesting marketing scheme. Is that rude to say?
Yeah.
And you would sign up and you'd get them. And then they would, if I recall, they kept on sending you stuff, right? Unless you
Right.
refused it.
Yes. From what I recall too, I was on the other end of it, but one of those negative responses that you kept getting it until you told them, don't send them anymore. And then I understand you also could send them back, and then they would pay for the return postage if you didn't want it, which became
Right. But
problematic when people would record it. But then you had to do with it where you couldn't open the record. Yeah, that's a whole other story.
a whole other Megillah. So I'd mentioned at the introduction that conversation we had about, and I didn't know this. One, I didn't know that there's a lifespan to a vinyl record, and you were telling me about the quality difference between a 45 and an LP. So if you can get into that, I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I don't really know if there's much of a quality difference between the two, but 45 has the big hole in the middle, of course, and then it spins at 45 RPM, and it's made out of styrene, so it's injection molded like a CD is injection molded.
Okay.
Where a vinyl record is made out of PVC and polyvinyl chloride, and it spins at 33 and a third RPM, and it's flexible, where the 45s aren't too flexible. They're very stiff. If you ever sat on a 45, you probably broke it in half.
Right. Right.
My
Right.
brother did that, and I beat the crap out of him. But my favorite 45. But in the olden days, it was a singles business, and even in the olden days with 78s, which were made out of, I'm trying to remember what they were made out of, but they were also could easily break.
Right.
And
Very thick, if I
right.
recall, really
Yeah, and
thick plastic.
78s were two-sided, and they started calling them albums. Little trivia is because if you ever saw where your parents kept their albums, they kept them in what looked like a photograph album.
Right.
It
Yep.
was square, and there would be 10 sleeves. A 10 sleeve, take that back, 5 sleeves, and there would be a single on each side of the 78, and that's where the 33 and a third ended up getting 10 tracks on it.
Oh, I
Because
see.
we're saying, and then they still call it an album, even though it's not in the photo album. but still called an album because you still had the 10 tracks.
Right, right.
In the early
I'm sorry.
in the early days, even before my time, RCA had a different speed. The faster it spins, the better the quality. And that's where the
Okay.
42s should have a better quality because it spins faster. And then the 33 and a third spins only at 33 and a third RPM. But I think RCA, they were developing a 12-inch record that's on that 45 RPM, but you couldn't fit as many tracks on it,
Right,
right?
right.
So for the 12-inch size.
I remember as a kid, you know, going to Pergaments in Levittown, and you could buy a 45. You know, there was this, you know, they had the list of the top 10 songs. You could pick it out. And it was always cool to, you know, find the B side, you know, some obscure song that was, you know, maybe made it to the album or not. But it was a lower threshold for a 13-year-old to buy his own music and wear it out. And what's great, and I'm glad there's a resurgence of interest in vinyl. I mean, we used to just listen to it. We'd wear them out. We'd wear them out, you know, and
All right.
there's a lifespan to an album, right?
100,
100 plays.
about 100 plays. Because you have the needle. The needle's touching the disc. The first time you play it, it's degraded. So it keeps degrading and degrading until finally, you know, all you hear is scratching
Right.
in the
Scratch and pops, right?
yeah, yeah. So if you
Exactly.
and sometimes those scratches and pops are like old friends. So you visit your album and you still remember where the pop was or the tick was, where the skip was.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, which company were you at when the transition started happening from vinyl to did it go vinyl to cassettes or did it go vinyl 8 tracks cassettes?
Yeah, actually, no, I was with Columbia Records, and we were still doing reel to reel. And
Wow.
reel to reel, you mentioned the Columbia Record Club, and the Record Club still had reel to reel, so you could subscribe to get reel to reels. And then we had 8 tracks, so 8 track was pretty popular, especially a lot of the cars had 8 track players. And that's
Yep, mine
before
did.
cassette. So there's always two configurations. There was the LP configuration, and then there was the uh, 8 track, reel to reel LP, LP 8 track, LP cassette. It's only when the CD came out that LP started to wane and created a lot of anxiety in the business until they realized that they are selling all the catalog over again, at a big margin. In the early days of CD before they were manufactured here in the United States, raw disc itself was $3.50. So it had to, and then it still needed to be packaged. And of course, in the early days, they were still packaging the CD as if it was a cassette, because the cassette they want to get it out from behind the locked cabinet. Now, if you remember going to the store, you had to buy the cassette behind the locked cabinet, which everybody felt, especially the salespeople, felt like it helped. It kept sales down because people couldn't touch it, look at it.
Right.
So they wanted to take the CD out from behind the locked cabinet. I helped develop package, two different packages. One was a package that was plastic that folded over. The idea was to use the same racks because nobody knew where the CD was going to go. So the retailers didn't want to change the racks. So how do you get a CD that's this big into the
Right.
racks? Well, they started putting boxes, but you can't put it in a box or this way because it doesn't fit two next to each other. So what's the simplest thing to do? Turn it on its side. Okay. You put two CDs side to side in boxes or in blister packages is what they first came out in, and they fit in the LP rack.
I
And
see.
so the retailers were happy, manufacturers, us, the Columbia Records distributors were happy, and it moved on from there. And then, of course, they're stealing, and then got it involved in lots of the security, that's the security tags, and they were expensive. They were nickel each for security tags until we
Oh,
scratched our heads a little bit and said, well, you don't really need to put one on every CD. If you put it on every third CD, every fourth CD, it's still secure because no one knows if you're stealing it, if you're stealing the bad one or a good one.
right, right.
But as it turns out, when all the research is said and done, a lot of the stealing from retail weren't people. It was the employees themselves out the back door. So then they had to put up security pontoons on the doors that come into the store and then out the back door. So where there's
Right,
somebody wants to steal something, they steal refrigerators. So it's hard
right.
to protect yourself from that.
Now, talking about the packaging, what I found interesting when I was a kid listening to a record is, you know, you got to look at something the liner notes, who played on what song, all that was in great deal. You would fold it open in many cases, if it was a double album. And then once it went to cassettes and CDs, I remember the CD cases was a square case, but then they had an elongated box. Maybe that's,
Yeah.
for
And we used to call that the long box.
the long box. How creative.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you this. So you were on the production end of it.
Yes.
Do you recall any particular album cover that really either was extremely challenging? And then the next question to that is, who has creative control of what the album cover looks like? Is it the artist? Is it the
Yeah.
record company? Where does it go?
Find out. Yeah. It depended upon the stature of the act of the artist.
Okay.
Uh, the artist was, Barbara Streisand had a lot of input, let's say, for example, and some of the other acts had a lot of input. Some of them didn't have any input. They didn't care. Others, I remember when Kansas first came out, I think it's a flying guitar, but it was always a big deal for marketing to have an image of the band.
Right. Branding.
That was
Yeah.
a good selling point, and they didn't want the image of the band, and for whatever reason is they got their way. And I think it was mostly because we were trying to get Columbia Records wanted to get more into rock, and they allowed some of that to happen. But a lot of it is collaboration between the art department, the creative department, marketing, the artist manager, their management, the acts themselves whenever they need to get into it or if they want to get into it. Then there's conversation sometimes like an act once come down to see me. They said, go see Vaccarelli when I was at RCA and he'll talk to you about it. Okay. Because they wanted special packaging, special. I said, listen, we could do any of this. We could do embossing, die cutting, stamping, more pages than 8 pages, 4 color the inside outside, but it all costs something. I said, this is a business. Okay. And like any business, it used to be recoupable, used to be a bad word. Okay. In the music industry, but all
Okay.
recoupable is return on investment. So if the record company's investing money in you and they're investing money in packaging, if you don't care if you make any money on the record, that's okay. They'll do it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But a lot of these records, the music industry it's a consignment business basically because any music that went out that the retailers purchased, they were able to return, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 15%. There were return privileges. And then if there went above the return privilege, then there was a disincentive. All right. But I would imagine, I would bet dollars to donuts that they never got hit with the disincentive. So, there's the old expression, shipping gold and returning platinum because you used to give away free goods to help get positioning at retail. You want to get an income.
Right.
You
Sure.
want to get, okay, so you give free goods. And if the thing didn't sell, you get more back than what you shipped. Really never happened, but a lot would come back, more than what anybody would expect. So you didn't make any money on it. So there's all of that that goes into helping. Day is done. What is the record? What was the record for my opinion? What was the record for an act? The record was radio play in the cities that they were touring,
Hmm.
and record is all promotion. So that was basically an expensive promotion opportunity for the bands. Because how do they even know anybody's around? But radio would say, "Hey, so and so's in town," and they'll play the next single, they'll play the next cut, playing this. So they really made their money. A lot of the bands made money from touring, not from record sales. And it's the same today. Okay, unless you're
Yeah.
a big act. I think if you do over 1 million, maybe you get, like you said, 5 cents. But it depends on the act and the stature of the act.
I remember, I remember a couple of record albums, and I don't know if this fell into the record companies that you worked at, but I remember the Rolling Stones had one that had a zipper on it, like a fly.
Oh yeah, right.
And there was also, I forget which band did it, but they actually did like a brown paper bag cover
Yeah.
over their album, and you didn't know what particular album cover you were getting. Was that something you worked on?
Yeah, that was Warner Brothers did a lot of that special Warner Electra Asylum that Columbia didn't do a lot of the special things because they had a lot of the top acts anyway, and a lot of bands were okay with what they got. It was a big deal for them to get print on board, on sulfide board rather than paper mounted to it. You asked me before about a special. Speaking of that, we did an album for Chicago, and it was embossed. It was embossed at it was embossed in Chicago at American Banknote So the company made money. Okay.
Wow.
So they printed money not for us, but for South America and other countries, and it was all done engraved. And so we had a giant engraving. It was a double engraving, so it was 12 by 24 uh, piece of engraving that we did a limited edition of that. And I had to go out to Chicago and just to watch it run on press. And it was a blue tint color, so it looked like money. And you can feel it. So if anybody has that album, it's probably worth it or something because after the album ran its course, okay, then we just printed it on paper.
Right.
So
They reverted.
it was not embossed any longer. I should have kept some of the press sheets from that.
So I don't know if you know this, but now when an album runs its course, right? Vinyl kind of went away when we've got these different vehicles like cassettes and what have you and CDs. Do they go back and say, you know what, let's bring this back and start making vinyl of this? Or once it's done, it's done?
No, I don't think so. Depends again, okay, on the success of the album. Moody Blues, In Search of the Lost Chord came out.
Your
Uh,
favorite album?
LP, one of my favorite albums, right? I wore out side A because I didn't know there was a side B. I never played side B. In those days, you had a player that just dropped the discs until the CD came out. Then I discovered the second side. But in any case, yeah, they can, that was LP, it was on cassette, it was on CD. It's streamed now, downloaded when it was downloading. Now everything's streamed, nobody downloads. And yeah, no, they bring it back, especially nowadays with the LP. The LP, there's no returns. If I'm not mistaken, there's no returns processing any longer. So
I
it's
see.
one-way sale. So they'll manufacture however many they think will sell, and then they put it out there and sell it. And then you can't return it. Retailers can't return it. But
Right.
yeah, yeah. So that's a good thing. Used to
Yeah,
do special
exactly.
editions, and a special edition, limited edition was limited to how many you can make. The record companies always ended up making too many. Make too many, and then you get returns, and then you scrap them. The returns get scrapped. You have no place to house it. I remember when I was at RCA and we were doing the RCA Record Club. It got so inexpensive to manufacture CDs that it didn't pay to refurbish it. So we made a deal with the post office to scrap anything that was returned. They certified that it was scrapped rather than return it because it was less expensive for me to rerun it if they had more to run than it was to refurbish. So yeah, you had always working with this make buy decision and how what's economical.
This might seem like a weird question, but
Nothing's weird in the music industry.
you sold records internationally.
Yeah.
Did you do versions for that were
Yes,
country specific?
yes. You did versions for radio specific. There was
Oh, okay.
Nashville acts that we would take out the steel guitar so that it would sell in the Northeast. So just regional in the United States, there are different versions. A lot of people don't realize how many different uh, and then you have a different producer, you have a different engineer,
Hmm.
all not remastering, but redoing, reworking singles. Every single ends up sometimes with 3 or 4 different versions of it, just
Interesting.
because of different radio. R&B radio sounds different than AC, adult contemporary radio, and AOR radio, which was the album oriented radio. So there's the album version, then there's usually a shorter version for the other radio stations because they want to have as much time for commercials. And everything was geared towards distribution. And that would be what would be considered distributing the sound. And then how do you get the music to radio? We used to send them 8 tracks, then we sent them CDs, then we send them LPs. Then we have single LPs that are a 12-inch record that would have one track on, and that was mostly for disc jockeys and at clubs. And then
Okay.
those we would make those, but that would have to be produced differently because the producer would have to do that in mono because you don't send in a single for a club in stereo because you need to be able to stand anywhere in the club and hear all the music. Okay, so it's mono, but you don't want to send them a stereo either. That the disc jockey then converts it to mono because you can switch it off, but then because the
Right.
sound isn't the same, so you needed a producer that actually listened to it and produced it and produced the
Interesting.
mono version. Yeah.
Now, I
So
got to
yeah, then
ask
all
you,
the countries have different Latin music, especially. Okay, you have to have Spain and Portugal adjacent to each other. they don't listen to the same music. It's not the same. It's not the same Spanish music. You have Mexican, Latin music. You have Colombian, South America. It's all different kinds of Latin music, and some of that sells here in the United States, some of it doesn't. It was always a big deal for us for imports to come in, and we would want to stop the imports from coming in because then they would get returned through our distribution center because all of the record companies labels themselves are regional. So you don't want to take back returns from Mexico that came in from Mexico
Right.
that may have come into the United States less expensive, and then the retailers mark them up, and then returns happen. So we had to. So I remember the days of the barcode when that first came out. I was
Right.
responsible for
Right.
that when the barcodes first came out. But yet we had to change selection numbers, change the barcode so we could scan it at retail. You can't at the distribution center, at the returns processing center. You can't visually see any kind of difference, but you scan it and say, okay, this is Mexico. It's got to go back to that.
Right.
This is Canada. This is South America. This is Europe. This is, yeah. So it was all that. And then sometimes there are a lot of times that the European versions would come in because it would be different than the music here. There'd be a different track versus the tracks here. And a lot of American acts started in Europe. The biggest market in Europe is Germany. I think it still is. A lot of the American boy bands started in Germany. I think we're like the top music consumer, but then Japan is also a giant music consumer. Then you have everybody else. So
Interesting. Interesting.
they try to guide.
Now, I know this was definitely before your time, and Alan Freed, and we were talking about radio play and the payola. For those who don't know payola, they would pay to play the songs, pay the DJs to play the songs, and then that came crashing down. I don't recall how, but what changes in record companies happened when that time period moved on? How did they get airplay? Was it just cross your fingers, or were there other things involved?
Well, yeah, it's too bad, because what's happening now is okay. So anybody could put something out on the internet, but nobody knows. It's like a dictionary, not in alphabetical order. You can't find anything. You can't find what you want. I still think to this day, if I'm not mistaken, people buy music because they heard it on the radio. It's still radio because hearing it on the radio is what legitimizes it. So you have a disc jockey or you have a radio programmer. The music program director usually programs the music for all the disc jockeys, except in rare cases, I would imagine that some of the disc jockeys have autonomous.
Right.
And um you're following his taste. It's like going to a fine restaurant. You go to this restaurant because of who the chef is. It's the same thing. You're following somebody's taste. Yeah, and what would have to happen is you have to promote it. So we had record promoters that would go from radio stations to radio stations. Listen to this record. Listen to that record. This is pretty cool. Yeah. They would. Oh yeah, you know what? I like it. So you couldn't just pay somebody, which who knows if it happened anyway occasionally, but you had actually appeal to their taste. Because what also happened was, especially in the major markets, no record ever broke out of New York or LA because the market is too big and they rely too much on advertising. The biggest fear radio has is that you're going to turn the channel off. So a disc jockey could play something, and if it's terrible and nobody's listening to it, he's in deep poop.
People,
What are
yeah.
you doing? We need, people are turning the station off because of this or that or whatever. Then there's sometimes, and usually we see the best records break out of, and I still think it's this day, is college radio. But
Okay.
college radio, those disc jockeys are autonomous, and they play what they like. And usually that's cutting edge or leading edge. And then from college radio, it'll get regional play, maybe in Philadelphia, off of Cleveland, smaller tertiary cities. Then it gets into secondary cities. Then finally somebody becomes aware of it, and usually it's the promoters. The promoters will bring it to the attention of the music director at the radio stations and say, "Hey, listen, you're getting good play over here. We're getting good play there, and it's coming this way." Bigger problem was rap because the rap groups there's Philadelphia rap, there's Cleveland rap, there's San Diego rap, there's Texas. So
LA
they
rap,
would
yeah.
play that regional music in that, not their region, unless there was some. That's when they started debating each other in music.
Right.
Okay, and then that became spread a little bit further. Yeah, it's just a lot of it's like any business. I would imagine that if you talk to somebody that makes bagels, okay, to get into what's involved in making a bagel. We go, holy crap, I didn't know that. But there's a, yeah.
Right.
And when we were ordering railroad cars, silos of PVC, shrink wrap, to wrap it. And then as they tried to save money and make it thinner, if you shrink wrapped it, it would curl or warp.
Right.
So now we had to get reduced shrink wrap. It's like, that old expression, butterfly effect. You did one thing you thought was a good thing, okay, and it affected 5 or 6 other things down the line. And if you didn't think about it ahead, you had to wait for it to happen. But
Right. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's like, your mother put your albums in the attic thinking she was
yeah.
storing it.
If
They're
you put something,
destroyed.
and actually they're pretty good in the attic. If they were flat. If it was
Right.
on
Right.
edge or
Exactly.
something, yeah, it was like that needle waved.
Yeah, it's so interesting about the airplay and keeping people tuned in. It's really what's happening with algorithms. It's taking the human out of it, as far as YouTube. The whole thing with YouTube and my success trying to get success on YouTube is how long is somebody listening to your program, your song or whatever, and are they commenting? Are they sharing it? Or are they putting it on their playlist? It's the same thing, except the tangibleness is right now you have, and maybe I'll get a little controversial, is, you've got Spotify and these mega corporations that are getting hundreds of thousands of new songs uploaded to their catalog
Right.
and they're selling it, for ad time or whatever, or subscriptions, right? And the artist is getting screwed, So to me, it seems that the deck is stacked against the lowly singer-songwriter. And if you look at the Grammys, it's all the big names. It's
Yeah,
very rare
of
that
course.
you see
But
breakthrough, right?
but it's never been any different.
Okay.
The reason I say it's never been any different is that the record and radio play was basically an advertisement for the acts to tour. And I tell young people, I said, there's 2 things you need to do if you want to make any money. Number one, you have to write and write every day, and maybe some big name picks it up and it becomes a big hit, and you have to tour and you have to go and play and play and play and play. All the big names, their overnight successes really weren't so overnight. Years
Right. Right.
of grinding away and years of, and then not giving up. But just because you don't give up doesn't mean you're going to make it either. I mean, so at what point do you finally say, okay, enough? You give yourself a time schedule and that's it. And then you end up going
Yeah.
into the business, and not as an entertainer, but as an executive. And at least you can have empathy for the bands that you're trying to sign or that you're working with, or whatever part of the business you get into, if it's that important to you. Otherwise,
Yep.
no, you just use it as a side gig, but it's impossible. It's an impossible. It's as bad as being an actor. I mean, how do you ever
Yeah.
break out being an actor? It's
Yeah.
hard.
My experience of all the interviews that I've done, and I have my favorites about taste. And for me it was, hey, you know what? I'm getting as I grow older, I'm reminiscing about the songs I liked in high school, which we all do, I think, statistically. But then I was like, you know what? There's so much talent out there, and I discovered like all these great local artists. And I think the common denominator, or what I would assess as their success, are the ones with talent, right? The
Yeah.
ones, like you said, keep writing, keep writing, keep writing, keep creating, and the ones who are persistent and don't say no and make their own opportunities out there. And they're all good storytellers.
That's
I
right.
think that's another attribute that's really cool.
And that's the key now. When I was younger, it was about the musicality. It was about the music. In the Glenn Miller band, Tommy
Right.
Dorsey. Not when I was younger, but all those bands and Frank Sinatra. Yeah, some of it was the lyrics, but it was a big band. It was the sound. Okay, and now it's more about the lyrics. So the young people today want to, they like Taylor Swift. Her
Right.
lyrics are important to, she's telling a story, important to her fans. Her music doesn't have to be perfect, okay? Doesn't have to
Right.
be, uh, but people with good ears, okay, cringe at some music, at some of the sound, okay, because they hear that it's not right. It's not sounding right. They're off key. There's this and that, but it's irrelevant. Doesn't matter. I remember my daughter's going to college. Okay, so how old is she now? So 30 years ago. Okay, when she was in college. All right, and she wanted Puffy Combs wrote this tribute to Notorious Big. Okay, so I call.
He's in the news now. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I know. So I call over to Arista. I said, can I get the cassette single? Can I? Well, we're not selling it as a single. It's only going to be on the album and go to radio. I said, okay. So I told my daughter, I can't do it. Her girlfriend calls her from Florida on the telephone. Okay, that's a regular telephone. Okay, calls her from Florida and says the DJ just said he's going to play it. So she says, okay, hold it up to your radio, and I'm going to record it on the tape on the
Jesus.
cassette. Right. So I said, I'm telling this to the marketing, to the A&R people who like into all this high-end equipment. I said, how compressed is that? I said, she doesn't care about the quality. What she cares about is the lyrics. She cares about the
Right.
tone. She cares about the cadence of Puffy. That's what she wants. And that's what today. So it's about writing a story, like you just said. It's got to have a story. You're a good storyteller. Tell the story and they're not going to big giant studios and having to pay what you used to pay to be in a studio. Do it in your basement,
Yep.
and
Do
it's
it on your iPhone.
good and enough.
Yeah, exactly. I've equated to what's happened with the DIY production to the printing industry. Now, the printing industry was massive. Then the personal printer for your computer killed that overnight. Everything's old, that's new again. Hey, let's do this, Lou. Let's take a quick break and we're going to dive into some other things. Hey, everybody, stick with us. We'll be right back.
Here to help you connect with local artists. Follow us on Instagram for the latest up-to-date podcast episodes and also to connect with your local artists and their upcoming shows.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. We're with Lou Vaccarelli. Lou has such great experience in the record music industry, but he also has some chops in television. Lou, welcome back. Tell me about your experiences with television and how you bridged into it.
I started out at CBS Corporate, and I was responsible for all of the broadcast stations,
Okay.
the print that for the broadcast. I was only like 21, 22 years old. And why they gave me responsibility for this, I don't know, but I ran with it. So all the radio stations, all of the associated labels, the television stations, the network, just all the different issues. I met with Walter Cronkite a number of different times.
Well,
Great guy. In those days, you had to, he did the news, the evening news in New York, and 3 hour time difference. You hang around for 3 hours to broadcast again for California in case something happened in those 3 hours. He would be there. They could change the broadcast. I was there back in those days. Wasn't digital. It was all tape, reel to
yep.
reel. And guys would come in with the movie reels. Okay, he'd be talking about something. There'd be a guy editing when we're watching it. Guy editing while the front end is playing this video.
Wow.
Okay, and then walk. Okay, but they did a lot of good stuff then. The Edward R. Murrow back in the 50s, he used to interview celebrities in their home, and that was live. And
Yeah,
flats.
if I could stop you there, because what was so unique about that, what I recall, was he was talking to a screen.
Yes, person to
And it
person.
was like,
Good
that was
question.
like cutting edge.
I know how you do it nowadays. Nowadays, we used to do it with green, and then now you don't even have to have green. You could just change, like right where you are now. You can change the background with the way the computers
Right.
are. But I asked on a couple of groups I belong to, television group. Nobody remembers how they did that. Nobody
Wow.
knows if it was a rear projector that projected on the screen. If it was, but they didn't have television projectors then. They didn't have, and
Right.
was it cut out separate? And he was looking at a monitor, or was it there? So it's like a lot. It's still a question as to how they actually did it. But I remember talking to some of the guys when I was doing some local television. I mean, they wanted to buy a big giant flat screen. It was going to be like $25,000 or something.
Jeez, yeah.
Fine pixel flat screen. And I said, right, let's do something on green. Oh, no, you can't do it. I said, listen, Edward R. Murrow did it in the 50s. I said, see,
Hey.
I wasn't there, but I know. I pull up the YouTube things. I go, here, look. I said, here's Edward R. Murrow talking to, I forget who it was, right, one-on-one. I think it was called person to person. And
Right.
right there. I said, come on, we can do this. Then they scratch their heads and okay. Again, my favorite expression was just, how hard can it be? Tell me how hard it could be to do it, and then we'll figure it out. There's always a way to figure it out.
Sure. You just
So
need
yeah,
creative minds,
so
right?
yeah, so those were the early days of television and some local stuff on Long Island. And then I'm down here in Florida, have nothing to do. So I find this church. Actually, a good friend of mine, his son, goes to this church. He says, "You really have to come to this church." I said, "Ah, I'm going to this other church, St. Timothy's, and they give donuts at the end of the mass. So I don't know. Is he giving donuts out?
Service, right? Yeah.
And then the church stopped giving donuts out because it was off season. So all the snowbirds went home. So they giving out the donuts. So the apple fritters is what it was. So they stopped giving out the apple fritters. So I said, okay, I'll try the other church. And I was mesmerized. It was like, wow. I said, this is like unbelievable. I actually can understand every word he's saying. His
Right.
message is basically stories from the Bible. And not basically, they are. They're stories from the Bible. He has videos that I guess he subscribes to videos that he brings in these videos and he plays the video. And he has a PowerPoint. So what he's saying, you can read along with it. And people actually learn stuff. I'm Roman Catholic. I don't know. I'm 77 now. So 70 years, like since I'm 7 years old. And a lot of this I didn't know. And
Right.
it's not like it's anything different. So he has a good story about, and I'm going to see if I can get him on your show. And I don't want to, but so now I rinsed him. I said, yeah, I want to help. He says, well, what do you do? I said, "Yeah, we can do some television." And I talked to Carl, who's a Weingarter, who's the sound guy. He does some video, but he's really a sound guy. So I said, no, your sound in this place is great. I said, it's really good. And I think some of it's by accident, but accidental successes are a big deal. That sounds great. So I'm giving him a lot of compliments. I'm trying to get on their good side. So he says, yeah, well, if you do tell me we'll start, we want to do something with television. I said, okay. So they had a little studio and like a little trailer and the cameras are set up. So first he had little GoPro cameras, but then I said, okay, we got to upgrade if we're going to do like real television. We got
Right.
to upgrade,
Right.
and especially, and he's putting stuff on YouTube. So he has a lot of things on YouTube, and he's a country music, well, country Christian singer. Excellent. I mean, he's as good as any singer, country
Wow.
singer I've ever been around, and I've been around a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nashville had a big stable of country singers, Alan Jackson and people like that. And so I started working with him on that, and we're gradually building it up to where, I want to start to buy some time and out of Orlando. Orlando is 50 miles south of Central Florida, and I know some local television, but you can buy time, remnant time, just to get his feet wet. But he's doing sermons now, but I'd like to see him do. He doesn't know this yet. I'd like to see him do interviews with some of the congregation, because some of the congregation, he has a couple of people that are 100 years old. There's a guy that comes. We have a men's fellowship on Thursday nights that I go
Right.
to also, and he drives himself, and he has a walker, but okay, pretty good. Over 100 years, 101. Good living. I don't know. We talk about religion, talk about God, and you made it this long. God has a reason. God hasn't pulled the plug on me yet, so there must be
Right.
something
You got more good to
for us to
do.
do
Right.
yet. Okay, before he fires me, brings me back home. So I don't know. Yeah. So this is the way. This is the kind of conversations I have with him, more like street type of thing. Where he told me when he first started working with me, he said, "Listen, people don't tell me when I'm doing something wrong, when I look wrong, it says like, I could walk into the studio naked and nobody will say anything."
Right.
I said, well, you don't have to fear that. I'm pretty unfiltered. You want me to tell you, I'll tell you, and I'm okay with that. Like sometimes he has a gold necklace and one of my pet peeves, that little clasp is down here,
Right.
or the cross that he wears is over here. His mic is somewhere else. Or there's a wire, and so I look at him overall. And then when he comes into church to do the live, basically it's the live version, and he sings two songs first. His own song is all Christian based.
Right.
Then he does the sermon, then he does the video. He ends with a song. Have a choir, have a woman that teaches music in the local high school, and she plays the violin, excellent. And she fiddles sometimes. I love fiddling. And Hunter. And this is Norman Lee Schaefer so anybody out there, you want to look up Norman Lee Schaefer and see some of his stuff. And he's excellent. And I'm enjoying myself getting more involved, and two things now. So it's basically we talk about his music and how he gets radio play and how he can keep his music up there. We did a CD release party for him,
Right.
where instead of playing the CD, he just sang all the songs. And My 9-year-old grandson was there, Luca, and he was mesmerized. For 9 years old, he's
Yeah.
Catholic, not a Christian. He's Christian, but not Catholic. They don't go to the church, that type of thing. Mesmerized by him because he's that good, and the stories he tells and the music he has. It's really, I mean, the lead single is, and the name of the album is "One Sinner Saved," and the lead single is "One Sinner Saved," and probably it's just a story about himself, but he terrific. So like I said, so we've been upgrading the cameras. Okay. So I was using my camera as a back camera, just a Canon SLR. You saw it probably when I did some filming for you. Now we have Blackmagic cameras that we have for the front, and big scene when we show a wide angle of the congregation. We fit 400 people in at a time, and he does 3 services every Sunday.
On Sunday.
Mm.
You know what's interesting, Lou, and we were talking about this offline. It parallels so much that the church that I go to community church here in Babylon, and I'm a cradle Catholic, and discovered it. And I almost equate it to what this Lou Pizzarelli is one of the best public speaker preachers without being a personality per se. It's like a TED talk every week.
Yeah.
And what he'll do is he'll do a series over like 3 or 4 weeks and ties it together. It all starts with music, Christian music, great band, and it's all done within an hour.
Yes.
They serve bagels on the way in, and he goes,
There
you
you
know
go.
what? People are more comfortable with a cup of coffee and a bagel in their hand. Bring it up to the service.
Yep.
They parson off the kids to go to Sunday school, and it's such a welcoming thing for me. The way I measure it, if it's Wednesday and I'm still thinking about what they spoke about on Sunday,
Right.
man, I'm getting something out of this, and hopefully giving something to it. So I'm so
Yeah.
happy for you that
You
you're
got to
involved
spread the
with it.
word, and it's really because it's important, I think. I mean, a lot of people don't, a lot of people lost their faith, and, here's a way of coming back to it in an entertaining way. Okay. So it's
Right. There's nothing
entertaining.
wrong with being
Yeah, no,
entertained
exactly.
and worshiping
Yeah.
if it pulls you in.
Jesus was a storyteller, basically, and he was an
Right.
entertainer, and people follow him because he was entertaining. Hey, did you hear what he said today? Hear what he said? Okay, they spread the word that way, and it's the same thing with my pastor. Probably the same thing with yours. Did you hear what Pastor Norman said today? At church. And, oh my
Right.
God, he slipped. Like he was doing a sermon where I should send you a little clip. We made a little clip of it where he's talking about how when Jesus comes back, he's going to put you into a new body. And some woman in the church goes, yes, real loud. So he turns around and goes, who said that? But he goes with it. It wasn't like,
Yes.
it wasn't like this traditional thing that, oh my God, somebody broke my chain. Matter of fact,
Decorum.
it did break his chains.
Right.
And at one point so it goes, I've lost control of the church because he couldn't remember where he ended up. But it's that kind of thing when you have somebody like your pastor. And
Makes it
my
real.
pastor, they're human. They relate, and you can relate to what they're talking about.
By the way, for those who are listening, I'm going to put the links to both churches in the description so you can see what we're talking about.
Okay. Yeah.
And get that experience. It's so funny that we didn't talk about this before the interview, and then all of a sudden we're finding these parallels of community and coming from church scandal, where you can just throw your hands up and walk away. But for me, and I'll talk personally, is that yearning for community and finding Christ where I am. And I'm not precluded where I find him or he finds me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm learning. That's the best thing. I've always said if I learn something new every day, it's a good thing. And I'm learning like 3 or 4 things every day. And even sometimes technical things that have to do with this happened. Well, that's why we have this other thing happen, and then we work it out and try to figure it out. But yeah, we're learning as we go.
Well, that keeps us young and alive. Hey, Lou, I really want to thank you for giving me your time today.
Yeah,
And I've said this a lot, and I got it from my friend Bob Murray. He said, actually, Joe Torre said this to him. He said, because Bob was volunteering for some golf outing. He's like, it's nothing. And he said, no, Bob. He goes, we can account for what we have in the bank and what we own. We could never account for the time that we have left on this earth. And in fact, Lou, you gave me an hour, and we were able to be present to each other. It's a blessing, and I really appreciate it.
Anytime. You want me to come on again? I'm happy. If you want to do
You
like
got
a
it, brother.
three-way type of thing with somebody else, we could do that too and have a debate.
All right, guys. All right. Until next time, be well, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Steve. It's great.